My boyfriend told everyone I was crazy. Not dramatic, not emotional, crazy. The worst part? For a while, I almost believed him, until the day his biggest secret slipped out in front of everyone, and suddenly, the story he told about me started falling apart. Before we start, if you enjoy stories about betrayal, secrets, and quiet revenge, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps this channel grow and lets me keep bringing you more powerful stories like this one. Now, let's get into it. The first time Ethan called me crazy, it didn't sound cruel. It sounded like a joke. We were having dinner with a few of his friends at a small restaurant downtown. The place was warm and loud, full of people talking over each other while music played softly in the background. Ethan loved bringing me around his friends. At least, that's what I used to believe. That night seemed normal at first. Everyone was laughing, sharing stories, passing plates around the table. I remember thinking how lucky I was that Ethan's friends had always been so welcoming. Then I mentioned something small. "Didn't you say you were working late tonight?" I asked Ethan casually while sipping my drink. The table went quiet for a split second. Ethan looked at me like I had just said something strange. Then he laughed. Not the kind of laugh you give when something is funny. It was louder than necessary, the kind of laugh meant for an audience. He leaned back in his chair and looked at his friends. "See what I mean?" he said, shaking his head with a smile. "She does this all the time." I frowned slightly. "Does what?" "Makes things up," he replied lightly. A few people at the table chuckled, unsure whether they should laugh or not. My stomach tightened. "I'm not making it up," I said, keeping my voice calm. "You told me this morning you had to stay late at the office." Ethan reached across the table and grabbed my hand. To everyone else, it probably looked affectionate, but his fingers tightened just a little too hard. "Babe," he said softly, still smiling at everyone else, "you're doing it again." I blinked. "Doing what?" "That thing where you remember things that didn't happen." Someone at the table laughed awkwardly. Another person said, "Hey, my girlfriend does that too." Ethan nodded like they had just proven his point. "It's cute sometimes," he joked, "but it can get a little dramatic." More laughter followed. I forced a small smile, but inside something felt off. Because I knew what I heard that morning. He had stood in the kitchen while pouring coffee and said, "I'll be late tonight, big project deadline." I remembered it clearly. The tone of his voice, the way he grabbed his laptop bag. It wasn't a vague memory, it was specific. Yet somehow, sitting at that table, surrounded by people, I suddenly felt unsure. Ethan squeezed my hand again, this time more gently. "Don't worry about it," he said in a comforting voice. "It happens." The conversation moved on quickly after that. Someone changed the topic to weekend plans. Another friend started telling a story about work. Within minutes, everyone was laughing again. Everyone except me. Because something about the moment lingered in my mind. It wasn't just what Ethan said. It was how easily everyone accepted it. How quickly the narrative shifted. From a simple question to me being the overly dramatic girlfriend. Later that night, when we were driving home, I brought it up again. "You really don't remember saying you were working late?" I asked. He sighed like he was tired. "Not this again." "I'm just asking." He glanced at me briefly before looking back at the road. "You do this sometimes," he said calmly. "You build memories around assumptions." My chest tightened. "But I remember it." He shrugged. "Well, that doesn't mean it happened." Then he reached over and squeezed my knee reassuringly. "You worry too much," he added. "Try not to overthink everything." I stared out the window after that, watching the streetlights pass by, trying to replay the morning in my head. Every detail, every word. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe Ethan was right. Maybe I had remembered it wrong. Maybe I was overthinking things. What I didn't realize then was that this was the first step of something much bigger. Because once someone convinces you that your memory can't be trusted, they can rewrite almost anything. After that dinner, something between Ethan and me quietly shifted. Not in a dramatic way. Nothing exploded, nothing obviously broke. Instead, things changed slowly, in ways that were almost impossible to point out. At first, it was little things, small promises that somehow vanished later. One Saturday morning, I asked, "What time are we leaving from my sister's place tomorrow?" Ethan looked up from his phone. "Leaving for what?" "My sister's dinner," I said. "You said you'd come." He frowned slightly. "No, I didn't." I laughed, thinking he was joking. "Yes, you did, on Tuesday night, when we were watching that documentary." He shook his head calmly. "I think you misunderstood." My smile faded. "You literally said, 'Sure, we'll go.'" Ethan sighed softly, like he was dealing with something exhausting but familiar. "See, this is what I mean." "What do you mean?" "You hear things the way you want to hear them." The conversation ended there, but the strange part was, this kind of thing kept happening, over and over. A movie he said he wanted to watch, a trip he said we should plan, a restaurant he suggested. Later, when I mentioned any of it, he always had the same reaction. Confusion first, then concern, then that same patient tone. "I think you might be remembering it wrong." Sometimes he even looked genuinely worried, like he believed it, like I was slowly losing my grip on reality. At first, I argued, "I know what I heard, Ethan." But arguing never worked, because he never raised his voice. He never got angry. Instead, he stayed calm, almost sympathetic. "Hey," he'd say gently, "I'm not blaming you," which somehow made it worse, because it made me sound like the unreasonable one. Eventually, I started questioning myself. Maybe I really did mix things up sometimes. People forget things. Memories blur. It happens. But there were moments that felt too clear to be mistakes. Like one night when he came home almost 2 hours later than usual. "You're late," I said when he walked through the door. "I told you I'd be late," he replied while taking off his jacket. "No, you didn't." He paused and looked at me carefully. "Yes, I did." "When?" "This morning." I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach. "You never said anything this morning." Ethan rubbed his temples slowly. Then he gave a tired smile. "Babe, you were half asleep when I told you. That doesn't sound like something I'd forget." "Well," he said with a light shrug, "apparently you did." Then he leaned down and kissed my forehead, like the conversation was settled. That was the moment something inside me started to shift, not because of what he said, but because of how confident he sounded. Too confident, like someone who'd already rehearsed the answer. That night, while Ethan slept beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. My mind replayed every strange conversation we'd had over the past few weeks. Every moment where reality seemed to bend. Every time I walked away feeling confused. And a thought slowly crept into my mind. What if this wasn't random? What if it wasn't memory problems? What if someone was making me doubt myself on purpose? The idea sounded paranoid, extreme, almost crazy. But the more I thought about it, the more the pieces started to line up. And for the first time since all of this began, I decided to do something different. I stopped arguing. I stopped correcting him. Instead, I started paying attention, very carefully. Because if Ethan really was lying, sooner or later, he was going to slip. The hardest part about what Ethan was doing wasn't the lies. It was how easily everyone else believed them. At first, I thought the strange moments between us were private, just misunderstandings that happened behind closed doors. But slowly, I started noticing something unsettling. Ethan wasn't just telling me that I was imagining things. He was telling everyone else, too. Not directly, not in a cruel way, always framed like a concerned boyfriend trying his best. One evening, we went to a small house party hosted by one of his college friends. The place was crowded, music echoing through the living room while people stood in small groups with drinks in their hands. I was in the kitchen grabbing a soda when I overheard Ethan talking to a few people behind me. "She just gets anxious sometimes," he said. His voice sounded calm, understanding. "Overthinks everything." Someone asked, "Like what?" Ethan chuckled lightly. "Oh, you know, remembering conversations that never happened, stuff like that." My chest tightened. I stood still for a moment, pretending to look through the fridge while my ears burned. Another friend laughed softly. "That must be exhausting." Ethan sighed like the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. "It can be," he admitted, "but I try to be patient with her." Patient. That word again. I closed the fridge slowly and walked back into the living room, forcing a normal expression on my face. Ethan spotted me immediately. His smile appeared instantly, warm and charming. "There she is," he said. Everyone turned to look at me, and suddenly the atmosphere felt different, subtle but noticeable. A few people gave me polite smiles. Others looked at me the way you look at someone fragile, like they didn't want to say the wrong thing, like they were being careful. Later that night, while people were standing outside on the porch, Mark's friend came over to me. Mark had always been friendly, easygoing, which made what he said next even worse. "Hey," he began carefully, leaning against the railing beside me. "Don't take this the wrong way." That sentence alone made my stomach sink. But Ethan's a good guy. He's been really patient with everything. "With what?" I asked quietly. Mark hesitated. Then he gave a small shrug. "You know, the stress you've been under." Stress. That was the new label now. I nodded slowly, pretending to understand. But inside, something heavy settled in my chest. Because at that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't just happening between Ethan and me anymore. A story had already been written, and I was the unstable character in it. That night, when we got home, Ethan fell asleep quickly like he always did, but I couldn't sleep. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed with my phone in my hands. If Ethan kept telling everyone I remembered things wrong, then maybe I needed proof, real proof. So I opened our old message threads, months of conversations, scrolling slowly through them. At first, nothing seemed unusual, just normal texts, plans, jokes, random conversations. But then something caught my eye. A message from Ethan about dinner plans that he later claimed never existed. My heartbeat quickened. I kept scrolling, another message, then another. Each one tied to a moment where Ethan had told me I remembered things wrong. My fingers started moving faster across the screen, and suddenly a pattern began to appear. A clear one, too clear to ignore. Ethan hadn't just been lying occasionally. He had been carefully rewriting reality, one conversation at a time. And the deeper I looked into those messages, the more terrifying the truth became. Because it didn't look random anymore. It looked planned, like someone had been preparing this story for a very long time. And if that was true, then I had to ask myself one question. Why? Once I noticed a pattern, it became impossible to ignore. At first, I thought I might be overanalyzing things, looking for connections that weren't really there. But the more I paid attention, the clearer it became. Every time Ethan called me crazy, it happened right after I questioned something specific. A late night, a canceled plan, a missing hour in his day. It was never random. And once I realized that, I stopped confronting him completely. No more arguments, no more trying to prove I remembered things correctly. Instead, I changed my approach. I started observing, quietly, carefully, almost like I was studying a stranger instead of dating my boyfriend. At first, Ethan didn't seem to notice the change. If anything, he seemed relieved that I had stopped pushing back. Whenever something strange happened, I simply nodded. "Maybe you're right," I'd say. "You might have told me and I forgot." Ethan would smile gently, the way someone smiles when they think they finally solved a problem. But what he didn't realize was that I had started collecting something much more powerful than arguments: evidence. I began saving screenshots, messages, dates, times, every conversation where he promised something and later denied it, every detail I could find. It felt strange at first, like I was building a case against someone I loved. But a quiet voice in my head kept reminding me that something wasn't right. And the more I watched Ethan, the more suspicious things became. He was suddenly working late more often. Sometimes he'd leave the room to answer calls. Other times he'd flip his phone face down whenever I walked by. Small things, the kind of things you might normally ignore. But now I was paying attention. One night, while Ethan was in the shower, his phone lit up on the kitchen counter. A notification flashed across the screen. Just one name: Olivia, my best friend. I frowned for a moment. Olivia and Ethan had always gotten along well, but they didn't usually text each other directly. At least, not that I knew of. The screen went dark before I could see the message. When Ethan came back into the kitchen, he casually picked up his phone and slipped it into his pocket. I watched him carefully. "You seem busy lately," I said. "Work's been crazy," he replied quickly. Same answer as always. But something about the way he avoided eye contact made my stomach twist. Over the next few days, I noticed Olivia's name appearing more often. Quick notifications, short messages, always when Ethan thought I wasn't paying attention. Still, I tried to give them both the benefit of the doubt. Until one night, everything changed. It happened on a quiet Tuesday. Ethan had come home late again, claiming another last-minute meeting. After dinner, he opened his laptop at the kitchen counter to finish some work. Then his phone rang. He stepped outside to take the call, leaving the laptop open. I wasn't trying to snoop. At least, that's what I told myself. But as I walked past the counter, a message notification popped up in the corner of the screen. Just one line, one sentence. From Olivia, my best friend. And the words made the air leave my lungs. Does she still believe she's crazy? I froze. My heart started pounding in my chest as I stared at the screen. Because in that moment, everything suddenly made sense. The lies, the confusion, the careful way Ethan had been shaping every conversation. But one question echoed louder than all the others. How long had this been going on? And more importantly, what exactly had they been planning? After seeing Olivia's message on Ethan's laptop, I didn't move for a long time. My hands were resting on the kitchen counter, but they felt strangely numb. Does she still believe she's crazy? The sentence repeated in my head like an echo. At first, my mind tried to reject it. There had to be another explanation. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe it was sarcasm. Maybe I misunderstood the context. But deep down, I already knew the truth, because suddenly, every strange moment over the past few months snapped into place, like pieces of a puzzle finally locking together. Ethan came back inside a minute later, still holding his phone. I quickly stepped away from the counter and pretended to be checking something in the fridge. "Work?" I asked casually. "Yeah," he replied, slipping his phone into his pocket. His voice sounded completely normal, too normal. For a moment, I wondered how someone could lie so easily, how someone could smile and talk like nothing was wrong while standing only a few feet away from the truth. But I didn't confront him, not that night. Instead, I did something he would never expect. I stayed quiet. Over the next few days, I started digging, carefully, patiently. Every time Ethan left his phone unattended for even a few seconds, I paid attention. Not grabbing it, not opening it, just observing. Notifications, names, timing. Olivia's name kept appearing, late at night, early in the morning, sometimes right after Ethan told me he had work meetings. But I needed more than suspicion. I needed proof. So I went back to the messages I had already saved. Screenshots of conversations Ethan later denied, promises he claimed never existed, plans he insisted I had imagined. When I lined up the dates with his late nights and canceled plans, the pattern became even clearer. Then I checked something else. Social media, old photos, tagged locations. At first, everything looked normal, but when I zoomed in on the details, small things started standing out. A restaurant Olivia posted from on a Friday night, the same night Ethan said he was stuck at the office. A photo from a rooftop bar, 2 glasses of wine on the table, no one visible in the frame, but I recognized the watch sitting next to one of the glasses, Ethan's watch. My stomach dropped. And yet, somehow, that still wasn't the worst part. The worst part came 2 nights later. Ethan had fallen asleep on the couch while watching TV. His phone buzzed beside him, just once. A message preview lit up the screen. Olivia, again. I glanced at Ethan, still asleep, breathing slowly, completely unaware. For a few seconds, I just stared at the phone. Then I picked it up. My hands were steady, surprisingly steady. The phone unlocked with face recognition. The message thread opened instantly. And suddenly, there it was. Months of conversations. Not just flirting, not just secret meetings. Planning. Actual planning. Olivia, if she keeps questioning things, just tell people she's imagining stuff again. Ethan, yeah, they already believe it. Olivia, eventually she'll push herself out of the relationship. Ethan, exactly. My chest felt tight as I read the next message. Olivia, then you won't even look like the bad guy. That was the moment the final piece clicked into place. They weren't just having an affair. They were setting the stage, convincing everyone I was unstable, making Ethan look like the patient boyfriend who tried his best until he finally couldn't take it anymore. It was cruel. It was calculated. And worst of all, it was almost working. Almost. But as I scrolled through the messages, something unexpected happened. The fear I'd been feeling for weeks slowly faded, replaced by something else. Clarity. Because now I finally knew the truth. And once you see the truth, you stop questioning yourself. I gently placed Ethan's phone back on the couch and stood up. Across the room, the calendar on the wall caught my attention. Next Saturday, Ethan's birthday. He had been planning a big party for weeks. Friends, coworkers, even some of his family. Everyone would be there, including Olivia. I stared at that date for a long moment. Then I slowly smiled because suddenly I had the perfect idea. If Ethan and Olivia wanted everyone to believe their version of the story, then maybe it was time for everyone to hear the real one. Ethan's birthday party was exactly the kind of event he loved. Loud, crowded, full of people. By the time I arrived, the house was already packed with guests. Music filled the living room and laughter echoed from the kitchen. Friends, coworkers, even a few of his relatives were scattered around the house with drinks in their hands. And right in the center of it all was Ethan, smiling, laughing, playing the role of the charming host. Olivia stood not too far from him, talking with a group of people like nothing in the world was wrong. For a moment, I watched them from across the room. 2 people who thought they had written the ending of my story. But tonight, that ending was going to change. Ethan eventually noticed me and walked over with that familiar warm smile. "Hey," he said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. "Glad you made it." "I wouldn't miss it," I replied calmly. A couple of hours passed. People drank, laughed, and told stories about Ethan. Eventually, someone shouted for a birthday toast. Ethan grabbed a glass and climbed halfway onto a chair, raising it in the air. "Thanks for coming, everyone," he said with a grin. "It means a lot." The room quieted as people lifted their drinks. Then Ethan chuckled and added jokingly, "And a special thanks to my girlfriend for putting up with me. Relationships take patience, right?" A few people laughed. I noticed Mark nodding sympathetically. That was my cue. I stepped forward. "Actually, I'd like to say something too." The room grew quiet again. Ethan looked slightly confused but handed me the TV remote connected to the screen behind him. My phone was already ready. I tapped once. The first screenshot appeared on the television, a text message from Ethan, a promise he later claimed never happened. People leaned closer. I tapped again. Another screenshot. Then another. Messages, dates, conversations. The room slowly filled with whispers. Ethan's smile disappeared. Olivia had gone completely pale. Finally, I showed the message that ended everything. "Olivia, does she still believe she's crazy?" The silence was suffocating. I looked around the room at the faces that once doubted me. "I'm not crazy," I said quietly. I was being lied to. No shouting, no dramatic speech, just the truth. Then I grabbed my coat and walked toward the door. Behind me, the room exploded into chaos. Voices rising, questions flying, but I didn't stop. Because for the first time in months, I didn't feel confused. I didn't feel small. I felt free. Sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones that make you doubt yourself. Real manipulation doesn't look loud or dramatic. Sometimes it looks like patience, like concern. But the truth always has a way of surfacing. And when it does, the people who try to silence you are usually the ones exposed. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories about betrayal, secrets, and unexpected justice. And I'll see you in the next video.